probably all seen the wonderful videos debunking all of the corset myths, deforming a woman's body or making them faint all the time, or Abby Cox's video about the heat in Victorian clothing, or all of those videos that show in real time how long it actually took a Victorian woman to get dressed. Well, I came across a new to me myth while working on my bustle dress for my last video. I was having trouble getting my mock-up to fit where I could raise my arms without my bodice raising up with it. I did the one thing no one should do, and I went to a Facebook group to ask some advice. To be fair, a lot of people gave me some wonderful and helpful advice. And while everyone in the group is a costumer, a lot of them are theatrical costumers, and the standards of fit are completely different for them than what I'm trying to do in making a recreation of a Victorian dress. One person told me I would never get the fit I wanted because women did not lift their arms above their head in the Victorian era. I was shocked that someone would actually believe this, let alone a costumer. Well, many more started chiming in saying this exact same thing. They believed dresses physically didn't allow women to lift their arms above their head because they didn't need to and because etiquette dictated it. Full disclosure, I am not a historian, and all of this information was obtained through what is available on the internet. I've done my best to make sure the information is factual and backed up with primary sources, but I am human and I may get some things wrong in this video. First, before I go down this rabbit hole of a rant, let's define the Victorian era and the style of dress that we're talking about here. The Victorian era lasted between 1837 and 1901, so that is a huge range of fashion that we're talking about here. You have the pre-crinoline era with all the petticoats, similar to what they were dressing like in the Romantic era. Then going into the large crinolines of the 1850s and 60s. The first bustle era, the natural form era, the second bustle era, and lastly, the massive sleeves of the 1890s giving way to the more frothy dresses that will become popular in the Edwardian era. The large majority of people telling me that Victorian women could not lift their arms above their heads claimed that it was because etiquette dictated it. First, should not and could not are two wildly different things. Second, I looked through several different etiquette guides dating from 1857 to 1878. I could not find one mention that arms should not be lifted above the head. I have several links of archived ones down below if you want to look through them. If anyone has a primary source of this belief, I would love to see it. 3. Have you tried going about your life without lifting your arms above your head? It's surprisingly difficult. Could you imagine going about your life and your bodice didn't allow you to raise your arms? While wearing the bustle dress, the wind picked up throughout the day and my hat, while firmly secured to my head with hat pins, had come loose throughout the day, and by the end of the day I kept having to reach up to try and grab it before it flew away. Could you imagine if every time a Victorian woman had to do that, her garments would lift, possibly showing her undergarments, or even worse, she might tear a hole in her underarm depending on how tight her bodice is, because apparently bodices did not allow for that kind of thing. Personally, that seems way more scandalous and costly than garments allowing them full range of motion in the first place. Their argument at this point is, well, upper class women had maids and servants to do all the tasks like doing their hair, helping them get dressed, cooking, cleaning, raising the children. Upper class Victorian women weren't just sitting around their very large houses, not moving and being waited on hand and foot. One thing I've learned since getting into fashion history is how similar people in the past were to us. They loved, they played, they laughed, and generally lived their lives just like we do today. They weren't the stoic, miserable, sexless people we tend to think of. And yes, household staffs did peak during the Victorian era. Upper classes could have upwards of 40 indoor servants, and middle classes would have at least 1 or 2. And side note, I'm currently only talking about Victorian England right now. I will get into America in a bit because that is a whole other kettle of fish. In 1871, over 4% of the English population was employed in service, and the vast majority of those were women. So what did servants at this time wear? Because surely they would wear some kind of garment that would allow them to raise their arms where the upper classes couldn't, right? Some of them could be wearing shirtwaists that you could argue were looser fitting, but most of them are wearing just plain dresses in cuts very consistent with the time. It would be odd for the lower class women to be allowed freedom of full range of motion, while the richest of women were stuck with their arms at their sides. If they had the ability to allow for full range of motion, why would a woman, who most likely was the one ordering the dresses from the dressmaker, choose to be unable to lift her arms? Sure, I have chosen to wear an outfit I could barely move in for a special occasion, but that would get so old if that was a reality for everyday life. Also, a huge part of Victorian life, especially in the later part of the era, was exercise. Victorian women didn't just play piano, needlepoint, paint, take strolls around the gardens. They enjoyed a wide range of activities and sports. I found a household guide from the 1880s that had a whole chapter on calisthenics for women. While it's true some sportswear were knits that were stretchy, a lot of sportswear was just cotton dresses that were washable, but cut in the exact same manner as a regular day dress. Look at all these pictures of women participating in tennis, cycling, archery, dressage, swimming, soccer, even boxing. I haven't even begun to talk about dancing. I think when most of us think of the Victorian era, we think of elaborate balls and beautiful silk gowns. Did they dance with their arms at their sides the entire Victorian era? Someone better tell these choreographers Victorians weren't allowed to do these moves. Also, I hope your dance partner is not too tall. Oh, but Sam, ball gowns were sleeveless, you say. Were they? Were they? Were they? Were they? I mean, sure, plenty were, but a lot weren't. Ooh, maybe that was the secret to telling whether a lady wanted to dance or not. No sleeves, good to dance. Wearing sleeves, stay away. Speaking of Gone with the Wind and Little Women, let's talk about life in America. First, you will notice the Victorian era overlaps with the Civil War. You had women nurses in the Civil War, and you also had the expansion west. I hope they made sure to pack the dresses that they could move in. It was hard enough on the Oregon Trail, dysentery, and you couldn't move your arms above your head. That's rough, man. You also had slavery in the US. Some of the first mass-produced clothes were clothes for slaves because the slave owners felt that it was a waste of labor to use some of their slaves to make clothes for other slaves. So those clothes most likely fit differently than other people wore because they weren't made specifically for the person wearing it. Not Your Mama's History has a lot of incredible videos talking about the lives of enslaved women. I highly recommend going over and watching her videos because she knows a whole lot more about this specific topic than I do. I'll link her channel down below. Like I said, mass manufacturing of clothing was starting to happen during this time, but women's clothing was largely made specifically for the wearer in the 1800s. A US government report issued in 1811 found that 2/3 of all garments worn by inhabitants in the United States were homemade garments. The first things to be made in garment factories were undergarments like chemises and drawers. But standard sizing wasn't really invented until the Civil War for soldier uniforms. And then after the Civil War, things like coats for men started to be standardized, but women's clothing didn't really start to be standardized until the 1880s. With the lower classes being the first to take advantage of ready-to-wear clothing, and slowly upper-class women started to buy them as well until ready-to-wear clothing became the standard around 1920. So when you are getting clothes made specifically for your measurements or you're making them at home, you can get a really good fit. One thing we have really given up with mass manufactured clothing is a good range of motion. This isn't really a good top to show this on. Let me change. Our clothing moves with us when we raise our arms because of the overly large armholes. Victorian clothing had tight-fitting armholes which allowed for full range of motion without moving the bodice with it. I was only partially successful with my bodice. I didn't get the fit 100% right, but I figured after mock-up and mock-up and mock-up, it was okay for me to just be 80% happy with it and move on. Because if you strive for perfection, you're never going to reach it, and you'll never move on, and you'll never grow. Anyway, thank you for letting me go on this little rant. My husband is very tired of me yelling, "Of course women could raise their arms in the Victorian era," every couple of minutes for the last couple of months. Have you heard of any Victorian myths that you were shocked people actually believe in? If you do, let me know down in the comments because I'm gonna need a new rabbit hole to go down. Also, don't forget to subscribe and I will have a new sewing video for you next month. Speaking of etiquette, that were looser, and you could argue that's how they were allowed arm movements. I haven't even begun to talk about balls. Balls.
Of course, women in the Victorian age could raise their arms.